Okay, now we're back here again. And the reason we're back here again is I would like to write a slightly longer expression, not by much. I want to take everything that we know and I want to use it well. So, what I would like to do today is I would like to capture the IP address and the date and the time, but not including the milliseconds, as a full match, but I want to also capture the IP address, the date, and the time as 3 separate sub-values. In fact, you know how to do all of that already. Why don't you take a moment and write your version of the regular expression that will make everything from the start of the IP address to the end of the time as a full match, but will also capture the IP address, the date, and the time as 3 separate sub-pieces of data. Pause the video and do that really quick. Okay, here's how I would write this expression. Because I know that the data that I want is at the start of each of these lines, and we've got the global and the multi-line settings turned on, I'm going to start with a start of line symbol. And you'll notice that we get all of these little highlighted matches that just say, hey, yeah, this is the start of the line. You didn't select any characters. It's just, here's the beginning, so all your matches are empty. And then I'm going to follow it up with, okay, I want a digit that repeats between 1 and 3 times. I shouldn't say repeats, it occurs. We have a digit that occurs 1 to 3 times. And it's followed by a dot, a literal dot, optionally. And I want that whole pattern to occur 4 times. So I'm going to group that up and say that it repeats 4 times exactly. Now notice that I do get the IP address, but remember, whenever I repeat a group that is a capturing group, it will only ever record in the group part the last occurrence of the repetition. And that's not very useful to me. So I'm going to treat this pattern as a non-capturing group. So now my full match is the IP address. But wait, Mr. Krebs, you said you wanted the IP address to be its own subdata, and we know that subdata is collected in capturing groups. That is true, but the IP address as a whole is what I want to capture as a group, not just some segment of the IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that IP address pattern in its own grouping parenthetical, and now my full match is the IP address, and my subgroup, my group number 1, is also the IP address. Awesome. Now after the IP address, I need to capture these, well, I need to match, not capture, I need to match these 6 characters. And notice that we have a space, a hyphen, a space, a hyphen, a space, and then this opening square brace or square bracket. The spaces are considered word chars, but the hyphens and the square bracket are not. So I'm going to say I'm expecting there to be 6 characters of any kind. I don't even care what I don't care what they are. They're just 6 characters. If I really wanted to be strict here, if I really wanted to be safe, I could do what we've done before, and I could simply copy those 6 characters, making sure to escape the square bracket. And that is more specific, and that is safer. Since we're at the start of each of the records, and I know that this pattern never changes between the lines that we have in the file, I could do dot repeated 6 times, or I could do this. Technically, this is the safer approach, and I do believe that being more specific is better than less specific. But if you're looking for a shorter pattern, you could do dot with a repetition of 6. Okay, now I want to capture the date, and I know that I want the date to be its own group. In my date group, I'm going to have a digit where that repeats twice, followed by a /, remember to escape that, followed by 3 letters, I'll just use word chars here in this case, that repeats 3 times, followed by a /, and then a digit 4 times. That's going to be my date. Now after the date, we have this colon, and I'm leaving the colon out on its own because when I capture this time, I don't want that leading colon, that separating colon, to be part of my time information. It doesn't help me to have that first colon. So I'm going to match on that colon, but I'm not going to capture that colon. I'm going to start a new time capturing group, which sounds very Doctor Who, but anyway, and I know that I want a digit that occurs twice, followed by an optional colon, and I want that whole pattern to repeat 3 times. Now remember, I'm taking a complex pattern that I need to have repeated 3 times, but I don't want the complex pattern to be a capturing group, just a matching group. So I'm going to mark that repeating pattern as a non-capturing group. So outside of all of that, I have the capturing group for time, and then inside I have a matching but non-capturing subgroup to be repeated 3 times that actually helps us identify the time. Okay, so now look over here. I've got a full match that goes from the IP address through that 6-character separator, through the date, the colon separator, and then the time. And then in my groups, I have the IP address as one group, the date as a second group, and the time as a third group. This is awesome. This is exactly what we need and exactly what we want. So now that we have this pattern, I'm going to highlight the pattern and I'm going to copy it. Notice that when we make this copy, we don't get the forward slashes at the beginning or the end, and we don't get the flags. That's an important thing to notice, because now we're going to hop back over here to our regex, and we're going to declare another constant. And I like to keep my constants and my variables toward the top, especially if I'm concerned about scope. So let's have a constant, and we're just going to call it our regexp, our regular expression, right? So our regular expression, we're going to set it equal to, first of all, let's get our first forward slash in there. Then let's paste another forward slash and then our flags, followed by a semicolon to end the statement. Notice how this is highlighted. This kind of highlighting indicates to you that this is an acknowledged regular expression, that this will not be treated as a string, but rather as a regular expression type object, or a regular expression type pattern. The reason I had you do it in this order, by the way, I'm going to back this up just a little bit. Normally, I would throw in 2 forward slashes, our flags, and our semicolon, but notice how it is highlighted now. What does that indicate to you? Well, it indicates it's a comment, because all comments start with a double forward slash. If I put anything in between those slashes, now it becomes a regular expression. And if I highlight that space and replace it with our pasta, then sure enough, that is a regular expression. But before that, it's a comment. If you know this, that's not scary. You can do this and then paste your expression and you're fine. But some people, before they understand that, they freak out because this is a comment and they don't know what to do. I just wanted to point that out briefly. Okay, so here is our regular expression. And now that I have the regular expression, I can use this a couple of ways. If I wanted to, I could declare a new variable. I'm going to call it result. And I can approach this one of 2 ways. I can either start with the regular expression itself, dot, and then call the execute method, or exec. It wants to know upon which string to execute its pattern and return a match. So I'm going to say data. Remember, that data string is what contains all of the data read in from our file. And just to show you what the result looks like, I'm going to go ahead and log that out. Let's go ahead and log out the entire result. And as a matter of practice, this is from our previous video, I'm going to go ahead and kill that console. That way I don't have too many consoles running at once. And let's go ahead and run again. Ooh, this is a lot to look at, but don't be intimidated. I can explain everything. Notice that we have this square bracket at the beginning and the square bracket at the end. What that means is that result is actually an array, that this execute method returned an array. In fact, check this out. It says executes a search on a string using a regular expression pattern and returns an array containing the results of the search. Because really, when we do a regular expression match, it's going to send us the full match, followed by each of the groups, and then some more data about how the match performed or what it was performed upon. Interestingly, down here, I want you to take note of this. It says groups undefined. But wait, Mr. Krebs, didn't we define 3 groups? Well, yeah, we did. We actually have 3 groups here, so you would think they would appear down here. But I'm going to show you why they don't appear down there, and I'm going to show you how we can make them appear and use them more wisely. Just hang with me, we'll get there. Okay, so here is one way to execute our search, but what's the problem? Well, if you thought about it for a second, the problem is we get the result that is first in our file, but we get nothing else. But wait, Mr. Krebs, we were global. It wasn't supposed to return after the first result, right? Well, yeah, except execute only works that way. It only returns one match. Now I'm going to show you something here in a little bit where we can cycle through each unique match. Don't worry, but we're not there yet. What I want you to understand is that this exec or execute function only returns an array that represents a single match and all of its subgroups. Okay? But if what you want is just a bunch of matches, if you want all the matches, we could do this a little differently. I'm going to go ahead and comment that line out and instead redeclare result, but this time, instead of starting with our regular expression variable, I'm going to start with data. I'm going to start with the string because strings have a function called match, which takes in a regular expression, which is kind of the reverse, right? It's backwards from what we just did. Instead of starting with the regular expression and passing in the string to be analyzed, we start with the string to be analyzed and we pass in the regular expression. Now let's go ahead and kill our first console and let's run this again. Now look at our result. We still get the square braces indicating that we've received an array of results. But what do we get? We get a collection of strings where each string is what? It's the full match of each match in the file. Oh, but wait, Mr. Krebs, what happened to our groups? Well, match doesn't return the groups. At least it doesn't return the groups at this point. If I really wanted to get at the groups, what I could do is, now that result is an array, I could go to that match and I could do dot groups. Now notice that groups is undefined. But you also might remember from our previous run that, yeah, it would be undefined. But is it undefined because strings don't have groups? Or is it undefined because our groups doesn't have anything in it? It's kind of ambiguous. We don't really know. So we're going to have to play around with this just a little bit more. Tell you what, let's come back over here and let's uncomment our first approach, comment out our second approach. And if I come down here where we have the result object, I no longer have to index into it. Yeah, it's in an array, I get that, but it's also just an object with properties. Okay, to prove that this works, I'm going to print out index. You might recall that well here, I'll show you the whole thing actually. Let's go ahead and print out the whole object. And then I will print out the index property so that you can see that the property approach works. And then I will print out the groups property so that you can see that groups works. So here is the array of our properties, basically. An array of strings followed by the property index, the property input, and the property groups. Then we have our printout of result.index. And our index is 0, matching the property value. So we know that the property approach works. And then we have groups, which is undefined here, and it's undefined in our output. But since I showed you index, we know that it's not undefined coincidentally. That actually is the value of this property. So, Mr. Krebs, how could we change our expression so that our groups actually show up in this groups collection? We're going to cover that next in our following video, and we're also going to look at how can I then use groups to my advantage.